Okay, I want to believe that I see it, and we are going to get ready to rock and roll. So once again, welcome, welcome, welcome to Social Media Saturdays. I am your host, Taria Hodge, and this morning I am super excited to have our topic of conversation, which is creating safe spaces in business. So the guest that I have the pleasure to introduce this morning is a certified dating and relationship coach, and she helps high-achieving women build healthy, emotionally safe connections without overwhelm and second guessing. Her work centers around emotional intelligence, communication, and helping her clients rewrite patterns that no longer serves them. With a background in psychology and years of experience coaching women through dating, self-worth, and confidence challenges, she knows what it really takes to create safe and aligned relationships. Now, while her expertise lies in the dating world, her insights powerfully translate into a way we show up in business, lead with integrity, and build lasting relationships. So please help me welcome our guest for today, Dagmar Kuziak. Welcome, 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 Dagmar. Thank you for once again saying yes to joining me on Social Media Saturdays for this beautiful topic. I can't wait to sit down and unpack this conversation with you today. Now, I'm going to share with everyone, I think it's on the last, no, 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be interviewed by you on your podcast. And as we did that interview, one of the things I said, oh my gosh, the things that we unpacked in our conversation definitely applies to the way that we show up, in business. And so before we jump in, I'm just going to open up the floor to you to share a little bit with our in studio audience as well as those who are joining us online. So go ahead and share, tell us a little bit about you and then what led you to start doing this work in your business.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, and thank you for the kind introduction. I love it because it's rare to hear somebody else, right, talk about you in that way. So thank you for that. What a little bit about me, I grew up in a Eastern European family. I'm not gonna go through like, a whole big history of this, but I just want to give you guys a lay of the land because some of you may relate to this. I grew up in a place where we didn't have I love yous. There was no hugs. There
Mm.
was no talking about feelings or any of that, right? That's how I grew up. So fast forward into my adulthood, I thought I did really good like at work because I was working up the ladder in the corporate world, right? Getting promoted, all of that. But I had so many relationship issues, like at work with my bosses. I didn't understand them. Then going into the romantic world, 2014, I was engaged, and 6 months from getting married, we had paid for everything, and that relationship didn't work out. And
Wow.
so that's really what started my journey in like unraveling what is it about me? Like, because obviously these are patterns. When it happens once or twice, okay. But it's happening over where my relationships at work were suffering, in a lot of ways. On the outside, I look successful, but on the inside, I was dying inside because I didn't know how to resolve conflicts. I didn't know how to speak up, any of that.
Mhm.
So when in 2014, I chose to, I got to try out therapy, all of that. I spent years doing different things. I even ended up in 12-step programs for codependency. That's a whole other thing, we can get into, but I just didn't know what's going on. And then I started developing my own tools. Like I started looking into myself and saying, okay, what is it that I need to work on myself, right? What is it? Where do I need to start? And we'll get into, I'm sure here today, we're going to get into, getting into the details, but I started developing tools. And 2019, I was asked to start a meeting for women who are coming out of drugs and alcohol, but now they're sober from that, but they want to have healthy relationships and they don't know how. It was for the women's home in Houston when I used to live in Houston. And so I did that. I ran that for about a year and a half before COVID hit. I was running that every other Friday. It was before all of this.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Dagmar. I apologize. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, okay. Do you see it now? Yeah, there you go. I
Oh, there
apologize.
you
I hit
go.
the wrong button.
It's okay. It's okay. I get squirrely sometimes when I hear things. So, uh, I was leading the meetings and it hit me so it hit me around that time where I was like, well, why don't I do this maybe as a business? Perhaps I could start making money and help women unravel and figure out like what's holding them back from their relationships, right? What are those patterns and all of that? And that's how I started my whole journey. And then yeah, the rest is I guess it's doing a business, as all of you know, because you're entrepreneurs. It takes time. And I've made so many, I would say not mistakes because they're lessons and blessings, but there's a lot that I've learned along the way. But that's kind of how I started.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know one of the concepts that we unpacked when we had the opportunity to have our conversation on your platform is like you just said it, being able to recognize when something is a pattern and it's you move from that space of being able to say, well, it's everybody and it's not everybody if it's happening constantly over and over. So, how do we take the responsibility and start to go inward and take a look at ourselves and how we show up? So, yeah, I think I want to start our conversation off by asking, in your experience coaching women in dating, what are some of the most common patterns that you see when it comes to emotional safety and trust?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the patterns that I see a lot, and we're going to relate this to the business world because this is something that I see a lot in dating, right? But again, if it's a pattern in dating, it's a pattern everywhere. So one of the patterns in term that really impacts safety and trust is oversharing. I used to do so much of that. I thought I'm being vulnerable, right? I am giving someone my everything and I'm telling them everything about me. And it's common even in the business world too, because even if you hire say a virtual assistant, you get along really well with her. It's easy to go into that. Let me talk, oh, you have this issue in your past. Let me tell you about mine, right? And why that doesn't develop, like that's one of the patterns. Why that doesn't develop trust is because that actually comes from an unmet emotional need, believe it or not. When we overshare, it comes from the past, either we felt abandoned by a family member. And I don't mean it has to be a physical abandonment, right? Like the parent or the caregiver was not there for us physically, but it could be an emotionally unmet need. Maybe they never, like my dad, right? He never hugs me, never says I love you, right? That's a emotional need that's unmet. Well,
Mhm.
when that need is unmet, well, what do you want to do? You want somebody to love you. You want them to embrace you. You want them to acknowledge you. And so how do you do that? You blabber everything about yourself. And what that does to somebody who's healthy from the other side, they feel uncomfortable with that because they're realizing this person has no boundaries, this person has no limits, and this person really is craving for that affection and that attention. And it shies unhealthy people away from wanting to even work with you because they see it as a red flag. When you see it as, oh, I'm being all cuddly and vulnerable when it's not. It's the opposite.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you say that. So I'm in the space of social media, and
Mhm.
one of the things that I started to pay attention to, I started to pay attention to a conversation um, a few years ago, and I started to notice a trend on social media where people would just get on here, and I'm talking not in personal, but in business, like entrepreneurs, they would get on social media, and in my opinion, this is my opinion,
Mhm.
have conversations that I felt were conversations that should be had, I guess, with individuals or had in spaces, not necessarily on an open platform, because once again, is that oversharing or showing up in a way where even though your issue and your conversation that you have is a valid issue, the way how you are putting it out, because it's how now people are receiving it. And I was always left with the question is like, do they understand like the impact on their business? So as a professional, when you out there and you're once again going through all of the stuff that happens in business, because as entrepreneurs, like you said, everything is a learning experience. But what do you do with that learning experience? And when you put it out there, how is it going to be received? What's the impact on how it's going to affect your brand? And so one of the things that I started to pay attention to is like there's a difference in having a conversation versus going on a rant. And
Yeah.
what I saw was a lot of rants. And so I love that you put it across as being able to set the boundaries. And so I'm going to ask the question. So let's go a little bit deeper, because you said some stuff, but I find this especially for my people, because I serve purpose-driven, heart-centered women. And that's one of the things that I hear a lot, is that they struggle with the boundaries. Okay. So can you go a little bit deeper as to why they struggle with the boundaries, and what are some of the things that they could do to help create or put those boundaries in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's something I struggled with, right? I'm just telling you because I didn't learn about boundaries. So boundaries. So I want to, what I want to do is first define a boundary versus an expectation,
Mhm.
because often people like first before we get into that, if that's okay, because that's something that is very confusing to people, especially when they're starting off like in understanding boundaries. So boundaries have to do with ourselves. And the reason we set boundaries is because we want to set limits, produce safety for ourselves, right? It's to protect ourselves in a safe, healthy way. An expectation is something that has to do with the other person, right? It's what you're expecting or you're, a lot of times, this is where people get them mixed up. They have an assumption or an expectation of someone, and they're not explaining that. And that is a whole new, that produces a whole lot of issues, right? And a lot of times drama, because then someone will blame somebody else because they didn't do what they wanted them to do. But that's what an expectation is, right? So when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about limits for ourselves. And the reason, is that clear? Does that make sense?
Oh
I just
yeah.
want to distinguish between
Yeah.
both. Okay, awesome, awesome. So the reason that boundaries, one, are very difficult for a lot of people to set is because if you haven't been modeled it, right? And you haven't been modeled it, that becomes very difficult. And we're in a society where being nice is a lot of times it's like that's a good thing to be nice, and it's really not. Because when you're nice to someone, you're actually a people pleaser. You're someone that is never says no. You're always going to accommodate. You're going to go thousand times. You're going to do so much more for the other person. And for those folks, again, they correlate because people that don't set boundaries tend to go that way, right? Where they can give, give, give. But why boundaries become hard to set is because people, a lot of those folks, and I'm talking about myself, this was me, okay? I could give to the world and back, but I couldn't receive, right? I couldn't actually receive other people's love and and so that in itself was a struggle for me, right? And then you go a step further, setting the actual limits, because again, boundaries are limits, was very difficult for me because I was afraid that, oh my gosh, they're going to not like me. They're never going to want to work with me if I say no. right? It's going to be a form of what we call rejection, which now today I call it a misalignment because anyone that isn't going to want to work with you for saying no is a misalignment, right? They're not the right person. So that's why folks struggle with it is because one, they've never been taught it, and it's really hard to set those limits because of, again, it comes back to those past issues from our childhood and growing up, where when we said no that first time or the second time,
Mhm.
that parent was mad at us, or they raised their voice, or they set a tone. So the way to counter this is one, you've got to go back to why. It's always a question of why. Why is it so hard for me to set boundaries? What does it remind me of in my past? Is it my father would yell at me? Was it, a past relationship, romantic relationship, or a business relationship? What is it? Why, and understanding that, then going into when I set a boundary, what does it trigger inside of me, or what does it cause inside of me when I do it? Is it guilt? Is it, and I'll tell you, guilt versus resentment. Guilt won't kill you, but resentment will kill you.
Wow.
Guilt will not kill you, but resentment will. And the reason when we don't set boundaries, you and I and everybody here knows that, right? When we continue giving, giving, giving and not saying no, we built that resentment and anger, and then it built into anger, and anger actually causes a lot of cardiovascular diseases. There's a lot of research that shows that because anger always comes out in the gut and comes out in our stomach. So yeah, the first thing you do is figure out the why, what is triggering it, and this will tie into emotional intelligence. It's very important to get into. Do you want? I can just get into some of the stuff if you want me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, please do because
Okay,
I'm,
okay,
I'm
okay.
sitting here. I'm sitting here, and before you get in,
Yeah.
like this is the reason why I have you on here because like this conversation is such a real conversation. As I'm sitting here listening to you, one of the you like my brand is Serve Share Shine. And I really had to go in to really understand what it means to show up and serve. Okay, so based on like in my journey, I used to think serving meant saying yes to everyone and saying yes to everything. And to your point, exactly what you're talking about, I had no idea what boundaries were, how to set them, and then things would kind of blow up. Like when you get to that point where you feel like you're being, stretched and pulled thin, and going back to your point, at first I used to go outward with it. Then I had to look inside and be like, no, if it's happening over and over and over again, then the common denominator is me. So what is it that I need to take a look at? Right. And it is creating those healthy boundaries. So you are on track with your conversation. Go ahead, my dear.
Okay, because I'm always because I can go in for hours about this stuff, but that's uh so yes, you're absolutely right. We are the common denominator, right? When it becomes a pattern. That's why they're called patterns. Patterns come back to us. And the thing is so no, what I learned, right? I learned when I started boundaries. We'll get into that and I'll get into emotional intelligence after, but I just wanted to get into like some of the techniques for the boundaries. No is a complete answer. And no, you don't need to jade anyone with no's. You don't need to justify, you don't need to argue, you don't need to defend, and you don't need to explain yourself. There's no jading. You can say no, I'm not interested. That's a complete sentence. Because us as people, and I'll say for myself, that had no boundaries, I over explained again. Like I felt like, oh, I'll say no, but I have to over explain why I say no, or I have to justify it, right? Or defend myself suddenly. And that made it 120,000 times worse because now I'm saying no, which is great, but I still don't have a boundary. Because I'm still over explaining and doing those things. So no is a complete answer. And again, you're gonna and so why I'm talking about going into now emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is right, a core intelligence of your emotion. So there's more to it, and I'll just give you my definition and where this fits in, is how to heal all of these wounds, okay? And I can go into different patterns. emotional intelligence is the way to start. Gottman, if you listen to Gottman, they're a therapist. Gottman, they talk about that, but that's like the starting point and ending point on why relationships end or struggle. And we're talking, let's talk in the business world, is due to emotional intelligence. So how does it fit into boundaries? Well, emotional intelligence is what it is. It's focusing on understanding your feelings. And most people, by the way, only know happy, sad, and lonely. No, happy, sad, and angry. That's it. That's what most people know. There's a lot more emotions, right, than that. And it's important to tap into your emotions and understand what is your unmet need. Because when you're not able to set a boundary, okay, like let's just give an example. I I am struggling saying no to my VA because I really love her and I think she's going to like not want to work with me or she's going to raise her voice or tone at me, right? So say I'm not going to say no to her. Well, then what I do when because I have these thoughts, okay? I'm telling you, even though I've worked years and years in this, thoughts like that still come to me, okay? They still come to me. What I do is I look into my feeling. What am I feeling? And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling disconnected, or I'll give you an example, right? I'm feeling disconnected. And it's like, okay, what is that unmet need for me with not being setting a boundary? Sometimes, in this case, like with the VA, my need may be, well, I'm um, I need to, I'm just giving you an example. I need to feel connected. I want to feel connected to her because I haven't heard from her in a couple of days, right?
Mhm.
So in that case, then I need to pause, take a breather. I do breathing exercises, and then I can have a healthy communication with her. But if my feeling is I'm lonely that day, or my feeling is I'm sad that day, right? I'm just giving you an example. That I'll look at, okay, does that really have anything to do with the VA? No. What is going on, right? And then I'll look, well, my unmet need is, well, I do need a connection, but not from her. I want to feel connected to people. And so I might go out or I might read a book where I feel connected to the author. You know what I mean? So that's where emotional intelligence comes in. Emotional intelligence is really looking at your feelings and looking at what are your needs. Is it a need that you have to resolve by yourself, or is it a need that needs to be communicated to the other person? The only time you need to communicate it to the other person is if it's going to affect your relationship with that person. Otherwise, it's your need. And people mix those up a lot. I used to mix them up all the time where I'd go to my partner or go to my, somebody in business and be like, oh, or my ex-bosses in the past. And it was like, no, Dagmar, like, and that's why it's so important to get clear, right? The first step is always clarity, clarity on what is it you're feeling? What is it bringing up for you? What is it triggering? And is this something you need to bring up to someone or you need to resolve on your own? And the distinction is emotional intelligence 101.
Yeah. Oh, so where were you like about, I want to say like 10 years ago? Because as you were talking about the VAs, you remind me early on in my journey when I started working with VAs. And like you're hitting on such good points. Because one of the things I used to do, like believe it or not, is overshare. So where on communication platforms. I forgot which one. But I'm sharing things like, this is what I'm cooking today, and this is what I'm doing. And I'm sharing pictures of family. And in my mind, I'm thinking that I'm building a relationship with my VAs. So listening to you, what I'm hearing is that the unmet need was I'm lonely. So I'm the solopreneur doing everything inside of my business. I'm at my computer 24/7. I don't have a social life, right? This is so hitting home. Didn't have a social life back then. And so my VAs fill that need for me. Wow.
Amazing, amazing. And so,
Wow.
yeah, and so that need for you, what other way could you have now that you know this stuff, right? What other way can you explore that need? Because what I give my clients, there's physical needs. I put it into the physical needs, emotional needs, things that fulfill our emotions, right? There's also the mental needs and the spiritual needs. So in terms of for you, for instance, like an example, when I'm feeling lonely, the thing is, and I traveled 7 weeks ago. I moved 1,300 miles to another city. So I don't know people here. Okay. So loneliness is a big thing, right? So when I'm feeling lonely and I don't have people, I'll go into my mental need. My mental need to grow is books. So
Mm.
I'll feel that connection. What would your need, what would it be for you then now that you know what you know? How would you meet that need in another way from not talking to your
Yeah,
yeah,
so is interesting, right? That we because we talked about this on your podcast. So I'll
yeah,
go ahead and I'll share here today. So the boundaries piece was so important for me to get in business because I didn't realize as I stepped onto this journey how easy it is for you once again, like when you are in the people pleasing mode. So I wish I could tell you that I'm a recovered people pleaser. I'm not recovered on my journey to recovery, so I still struggle, right? But when I sit and I look at how I built my business, I actually built myself into this secluded space almost where everything was about the business. So I didn't have like you said, I didn't have the compartmentalization. So there was like no dating for me, no um external activities, like everything centered around the business. And so it wasn't until I started dating, right, back in 2019, I do believe it is 2019, I had to really sit down and take a look at the boundaries piece. So where does the business activity end, and where does my personal life, begin? Like, how do you do it? And so I started learning things like that. I'm like, oh, it's true. Your business needs to have a start time and a ending time. You want to have a healthy relationship. You have to make time, for your relationship,
yeah.
right? And even like you said, it was so easy for me to just be in conversations with, people in the business world because that was my life, right? And I probably did a whole lot of oversharing, a whole lot of overpouring. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. But things shifted, like when I started to take a look, at what it means to have a healthy relationship. What does it mean to sustain a healthy relationship as an entrepreneur? And do it. And it's definitely what you said, is like having those boundaries. And so as you were talking, one of the things I noticed is my communication, has changed. I was just like, wow, you just brought that back. Like I actually used to sit down on Sundays and cook and share pictures of what I'm cooking and all of that stuff. And I was thinking we was having a grand old time. But yeah, like now those things aren't anymore because I have that emotional need that's being filled, by my partner. But that was a great notice. I would have never like put it together like that.
Yeah, and what I want to bring up, that's beautiful. I mean, really beautiful, because what I want to bring up with what you're saying is when I ask people, what is your number one
The
issue
number one is
in relationships? They're always saying it's communication,
Mhm.
right? Communication is the issue, right? To your point. That's what you saw on social media. You saw people like, or in yourself, right? Oversharing your pictures or, things about yourself and doing that oversharing. And people look at it like that's a communication issue, but really it's a pattern issue. It's the boundary issue, right? It's looking at deeper the oversharing pattern. It's not communication is what we see, but there's a deeper issue to
Mm.
that. And that's what a lot of folks, and that's what all I thought is I'm just a poor communicator. I just don't know how to communicate. And that's why a lot of the dating coaches out there, and I'm just going to say this out loud, is they tell you this is what a red flag is. This is how you should text someone. This is how you should, and we get business coaches like that too, right? They tell you this is how you should post on social media. This is what you should do. This is how you should communicate to articulate your stuff in a better way. But one, that's not ever going to be authentically you because that's what someone else is telling you. And secondly, it's not going to get to the root. It's not going to fix the root of the issue on why you're struggling with that until you get to the dang patterns, you
Yeah.
know? And so it's a cycle like this. And I see it over and over and over again. And to that point, the second biggest thing I see is people have unrealistic expectations, both in the business world and in the dating world, and they don't communicate them. Like for instance, you and I are on a mastermind, right, group, and we have some of us have accountability partners. But if you don't communicate, this
Yeah.
is speaking with me, and I made this mistake with my partner. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to put it out there. I didn't communicate what my expectations are. How often do I want to talk?
Yeah.
What to talk about, right? Because also people are sometimes on different levels and um, they may want to overshare and look at it like you're rejecting them, but you're like, no, I just want to share about the business and share about this and that. Whatever your expectations are to communicate those. But again, you can't do that until you understand what your patterns are, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I've learned I'm better at. But to your point, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm a recovering person that has still, I mean, I think until we're alive, we're going to have stuff always coming up
Yeah.
because there'll be a new experience, new thing coming up. But what I can say is now that I'm unraveling all of these patterns, right? And helping others. I also have seen that the communication then becomes easier. It's like, okay, I'm going to communicate because I'm not afraid they're going to leave me now. I'm
Yeah.
not afraid that, right, something's going to happen. I'm going to communicate it because I need to set limits for myself. And I also need to be clear. It's trusting the other person can receive it as well. Because when we hold things back in terms of our expectations and what we want, we're also not giving the opportunity for the other person to receive that
Yeah.
and to trust us with that information. So it goes both ways.
I love that. And so one of the biggest things that I'm hearing you say is, take the time, to really self-assess.
Mhm.
Self-assess, understand where you are, what your needs are, what your boundaries are, because a lot of times, we talk about these things, and I know, like we said before, we hear boundaries, we hear the words, but sometimes do we really understand what it means to set boundaries? And we can't set the boundaries if we haven't, identified, the boundaries. We haven't taken a look at our patterns, and really go internal. And so once we haven't figured that out, it becomes hard or impossible to communicate it to others, And then people, and I always say people treat us the way how we teach them to treat us, right? And so if you don't have those things clear, like then people are going to show up, you know, how we're teaching them to show up in our life or how we allow them to show up in our life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I would say for everyone here that watching, the first thing to do, and I do this on a regular basis, like this could be an hourly, depending on what comes up, check in with your feelings. And if you don't know what your feelings are, this is what I help people with, right? Identifying what those feelings are, because like anger is a secondary emotion. There's more to it. There's feeling wheels out there that you can look at. I use emojis for my clients because a lot of times they don't know what they're feeling, and we all sometimes people don't even know what they're feeling, but they know where in their body, right? They're connect, right? They're feeling the tension. So I would say always check in with your feelings. How are you actually feeling throughout the entire day as a starting point? Because then that will assess, okay, if I'm not feeling calm, right? I'm not feeling safe, or I'm not feeling happy or content, you're feeling more of the negative emotions, that will be an indicator that something is going on,
Yeah.
right? And then you can assess and go deeper into that. But starting with the feelings, so important.
I love it. And you reminded me as you were talking about the emotions and stating that most people only know how to express, three emotions: anger, happy, sad. You reminded me of the book by Brene Brown. I think it's The Art of Vulnerability. I think that's the name, of the book. So, very, very great piece of work. If you have not read it as yet, The Art of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. And that work has helped me go into my journey on vulnerability. So, which is my next question for you. Okay. And so, in the entrepreneurial space and business too, a lot of women wear the strong, independent label proudly, right? Um, but that is actually, the mask of strength, is fear.
Mhm.
So, what is the cost of that in emotional relationships, both in the business world and the personal world?
What is it costing? Is that what you were
Yeah.
asking?
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, so much. This is what's interesting about that question is when I started my journey, I thought, well, first of all, I was like, I'm not going to be vulnerable at all. But then when I started unraveling what it looked like to be vulnerable, I was doing it with my friends, later with romantic partners, but I never thought in the business world like that actually is a good thing because like who does that? And we don't learn that, right? We learn, like you said, we're strong, independent, successful people. And it does come from fear, absolutely. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's costing you the ability to build trust. There is no trust with no vulnerability. And again, it's not the same as being oversharing, right? We are distinguishing those two. Being vulnerable is an example. Okay, I'll give you an example. If someone brings up something and it's a misunderstanding, okay, I'm just going to example, like say somebody's, I thought I sent someone a text. Let's just say I thought I sent them a text, a VA, right? I'll give you an example, a VA, a text. I like examples because it makes it a lot easier to understand this, right? I sent them a text and they tell me, no, I didn't get your text. Maybe I sent it to them, maybe I didn't, or maybe I wasn't clear, but I thought I sent it. And then the person comes back, right? Say this, I'm using an example, strong, independent woman type person comes back to you and is like, no, you didn't send the text and you misunderstood me. Those kinds of comments like you misunderstood me or you
Mhm.
didn't send the text. I mean, how do you guys feel when you hear that, right? I mean, you do you want to talk,
I hear blame.
you hear blame.
I hear it's my fault.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that doesn't make you right. And that's often what strong, independent, it's not that you guys, we mean to do that, but we don't come out with I statements. We don't come out with saying, well, you know what? Okay, maybe there wasn't a text sent. And I actually would love to have a conversation more about this with you, or I actually was confused because when you said there was a text and there wasn't, I actually felt confused.
Hmm.
It's not like you're being vulnerable, you're not oversharing, right? But you're just saying, I felt confused by that. Can we have a conversation to talk about this? And that makes a, you know what I mean? That makes it a very like you feel like
Right.
you can talk to the person rather than the blame, like you misunderstood me, you did this, you did that. And that's how I communicated in the past. Because I didn't I was saying I am confused or I feel confused or I feel disconnected by you or not by you, but I feel disconnected in the situation. Um, that's like, ooh, So again, you have to know what you're actually feeling, but that connects people. That connects people, and both in the business world and in the dating world, or in friendships, or in your family relationships. So not doing that obviously does not build trust, right? It builds a lot of distrust. And also, a lot of misunderstandings happen that way. And that's where the conflict happens. And that's where the drama triangle starts. There's something called the drama triangle. And and what you were saying, Tria, you're absolutely right. That's a blaming statement, right? You misunderstood me. You did this. What ends up happening with those is that's a perpetrator in the drama triangle. That's a person that you does a blame. Well, what happens with the blame, if the other person receiving is not healthy or hasn't worked through their patterns, they're going to most likely be the rescuer, and they're going to say, I'm so sorry. They're going to apologize their whole existence to that person. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I should have sent the text. I thought I sent the text. How can I make it better for you? How can I make you feel better? Or what can I do to make our relationship work? And that is not only attractive, but that doesn't then it builds this drama and it goes back and forth like this. But the person, like if I hear somebody say you misunderstood me, I, being the healthy person, would say, well, yeah, I apologize. I would say, you know what? I think you're right. I thought I was being clear. I wasn't. And I would love to have a conversation with you. Would you be open to that, to
Yeah.
nick this misunderstanding in the bud? Because you're and be accountable. Say like, you know what, you're right. I thought I was being clear, but I wasn't. Be accountable for that. Again, it doesn't mean you're not a strong, independent woman at all. It just means that you're being clear and you're expressing accountability and putting and injecting some feelings in there. Feelings are powerful. And Brene Brown talks a lot about this, right?
Yeah. And it's so and it's so key because like I love how you brought up the idea of the drama triangle because as I'm listening to you, I see how easy it is for people to keep being in that loop. So it's the thing where, someone, you know, says something, it's received in blame, then the person, who accepts it or feels, or processing it as blame, they go in once again to the people pleasing,
Yeah.
right? And then the other person, and then the blame starts again because now I don't know what's the word, but they take advantage of the people pleasing. And then next thing you know, you're not spiraling up, you're spiraling down. Okay. And so how can give us
Yeah.
at least about two to three things, things that we could do to help us better being able to reframe vulnerability as a leadership strength.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that question. I mean, the very first thing I would say is this is a simple technique, right? But just pause. I mean, when you hear something, right, and it comes to you as and it might not even be a blame, it might be a tone. It may trigger some kind of tone that you hear from someone, and you're like, oh my God, that's my father yelling at me. And they're not. They just are excited or passionate, right? Or they could be using, again, any kind of you statements whenever, and that's what I always say, reframe. From you statements. You statements they're the biggest downer and deflector and issue to building strong relationships, right? But if someone does that, what the number one thing I say is breathe. Take a pause break and breathe. I have breathing technique exercises you can do. You can breathe four times through your nostrils, breathe, then pause, then breathe four times downward, and then you can pause and breathe another four times, whatever it is. But the breathing helps because, and I will also smile when I hear it because something. It's not that I feel like smiling. I feel like going back and jabbing back at the person. That's really what my old self wants to do. I want to jab right back and say, okay, let me tell you what you didn't do. That's not the healthy way, right? So pausing and breathing, smiling because it does something, and then you can then either, if you're not ready to have the conversation, say, look, I know maybe you don't mean anything by your tone or anything like this, but I need to take a pause break in this conversation. I need to come back to you at a later time because I'm not ready to talk to you about this, right? And so that way you can then process it, go back to your feelings. What am I feeling, right? What is this bringing up for me? And then you can look at how do I want to communicate? Because again, it comes back to clarity. Got to have clarity. Because if you, I still to this day, sometimes when somebody is coming at, they're not even coming at me necessarily, or if they are, I still to this day struggle in the moment to, even with my breathing exercises, even with my pausing, and even with smiling, sometimes I still struggle coming back in a clear way back to them on what I want to communicate. So I will gently let them know, like, hey, let's talk about this later. And then I can be clear. And then what I use is something called nonviolent communication. I don't like the word because it has violence in it, but it's empathetic communication. So it always starts with an observation. The very first part of it starts with an observation. Like, well, when we were talking, I noticed that the tone was raised, or I noticed there was we had some intensity in our conversation, right? It's an observation. It's not saying you were intense, I was intense, but it's just an observation. It's almost like a journalist or reporter. What would they see
Yeah.
from the conversation in the very beginning? Then you can tell the person, I felt, and I felt this way, like I felt disconnected, or I felt unheard, maybe, right? Or, and this is just, again, I'm just telling you how I'm feeling. And this is what I was thinking, that maybe you didn't care or you didn't want to listen to
Mhm.
what I had to say. And I'm sure that's not what you meant, but I'm just telling you what I felt, what I was thinking. And this is what my need is. Like, I would really appreciate if, we can talk at a certain tone, or, whatever the need is, and you ask for it. And then you kind of pause and see, it becomes a conversation. And most people are receptive, but again, it takes two to tango. And I don't want any of you to feel disappointed if this doesn't work well for you always, because what happens is if someone has no emotional intelligence or very little, and they're struggling with regulating, they may not even receive that well because they're
Mhm.
still mad about X, Y, and Z, or they still struggle, you know what I mean, regulating their emotions. So it's important. This is why I'm talking about this, because before you hire anyone, right? Before you hire anyone, you can see, you can set the expectations and even set a tone, like, this is how I want us to have conversations in this manner, and even teach your VA or teach your person what that looks like, and see if they're receptive. Because again, there's reasons people struggle with relationships: clarity, right? That's what we talk about: clarity
Yep.
in your patterns, clarity and all of the stuff we're talking about, right? And then there's compatibility, and there's a misalignment. And a lot of times misalignments because of the expectations, or you didn't communicate what it is, that you wanted. You didn't, you want the person aligned with your values, your vision, but also you want to be able to be aligned on communication style. And the third reason people have trouble in their relationships is because of the communication. But it starts with clarity. Everything starts with clarity.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dagmar. And so I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because one of the things that I want us to take a few moments to unpack, because I hear it in business all the time. Like, I keep attracting the wrong people. And so whether it's the wrong people for as clients or the wrong people for collaborations, okay? So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we attract the wrong client, again, it comes back to us, right? It becomes an us problem. So
Hmm.
it comes back to unraveling what it is. Okay, knowing, like, I wrote down when I was attracting the same kinds of boyfriends, okay, and people, I wrote down, what are those patterns? Okay, so what is the thing that, what are there, what types of people am I attracting, right? So that's the first thing to unravel. I was attracting people that were, I would say, more distant towards me because I was always
Hmm.
oversharing. I was the oversharer, the overgiver, and then I also attracted folks that were plain out toxic, right? They had a lot of narcissistic tendencies, all that. And it wasn't because I'm a narcissistic person, it's because I am highly empathetic. But again, I gave too quickly, too fast. All of that. So it's important to look at the traits. What are the traits of these people that you're attracting? What do they look like, right? Are they folks that, do they blame? Are they shaming? Are what kinds of behaviors are you seeing in them? And then look at what are you doing? Like, what are your behaviors, right? Because you're contributing to this. Oh, well, I am an oversharer. Okay. Then, that is obviously something to look at, right? Or I am someone that is so-called too nice or a people pleaser, or I am even a perfectionist, right? We high achieving people who are perfectionists, we have sometimes unrealistic expectations of others because we have unrealistic expectations of our other self. So again, looking at that stuff, and that's why no chat GBT, in my opinion, can give you that. That's why I'm not saying this in an egotistical way, but I'm around to help people look at what is it, right?
Mhm.
That's the starting point. And then once you get to the starting point, then you can start looking at, okay, where's this coming from? Why am I doing this? And then how can I, it's a reframing, but it's really rechanging, right? Those behaviors and looking at like, what can I do differently? But it starts with understanding, right? The clarity, getting to understanding what it is that you're doing and who you're attracting. And I'll be honest with you, I still make this mistake. I attracted. So to me, now I'm on a good trajectory, but I sometimes slip. And I attracted, there was a business coach, a couple, this was last year, because of his charm. It reminded me of my dad. Very charming. He gave
Ah,
me a gift right away. He gave me a gift, and it was not, I mean, not a romantic gift because he's a business guy, but he gave me a branding guide, the gifts, and it reminded me that's my dad because my dad's love language was always he charms, he gifts, he does all of that. And I didn't pause to say, oh my gosh, Dagmar. And that was the hook. That was this guy's hook. And after that, there were other red flags I saw. But the red flag in me that I saw was one, I didn't pause. Two, I didn't evaluate why I'm getting sucked in so quickly. It was because it was so familiar for me. It was familiar. And familiar does not equal good, especially always good, especially when you aren't aware of what, is going on. Later, familiar can be, as you get healthier, right? Familiar can be good, but in the beginning, when the stuff is new, it can be, I'll just say it's unhealthy. And so I got sucked in, and then I realized I realized, no, 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 this person's not for me, and I stopped the relationship, but I got sucked in.
yeah. It's so interesting because one of the things that I teach is identifying your divine clients, right?
Mhm.
And in taking a look, and it could be clients and it could also be for your collaborators, partnerships, people who you have in business, is being able to do exactly, just that. And we should be tracking. And so this is for my social media Saturdays, superstars. I call my community superstars. This is for my superstars. So if you haven't, get a journal, get a diary, okay, that you are moving past the things that we're taught to look at, like which is the demographics, to do the work, like and like you said, attached to the emotional part of it, like when you work with this person, or what's the pattern, or what's the traits, the emotion that comes up, you know, around the people that you have in your circle, in your network. So can you start to identify the patterns? And so what it does, it helps you, get better in your communication. So you could start attracting more of the people, right, that you want to have in your space. And I talk about this all the time, like this
Love it.
difference, between the go out and find energy
Yeah.
versus us showing up inside in such a way where we're attracting, through our energy, the people that we want to have, in our space.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about journaling. I'm a big journaler. I mean, writing it down makes it real. And then once you get to that point of, like, to your point, identifying, I love what you're saying, go beyond the demographics and looking at the patterns. Once you get past that, what is really cool is I have something called a declaration. Okay. And I have a
Mhm.
declaration for my client, for the clients, and a declaration for my romantic partner, that I have. And I'll tell you that I'm seeing it's kind of like, I don't know if any of you have had this, but when I started researching to get my car, I got a Subaru Forester. I've always wanted a Subaru. And finally, I got enough money and I bought myself a Forester and I started seeing them everywhere
Oh,
because, right? I started seeing them here and there and there. It's the same thing, right? What we focus on grows, but if we keep focusing on the things that we don't have or we don't aren't doing well or beating ourselves up, that's what grows. And so what I have done with my clients, and I do it with myself, everything I do with my clients, I've done with myself or I do with myself, is the declaration isn't like I am looking for, like, for example, I'm looking for a client that is curious, consistent. I'm just giving you an example, right? Can connect with me on a deeper spiritual level. Instead of saying I'm looking for, I put I have. I have
mm,
found my person who is, and I list out that, right? And do that with my clients too. And I call the declaration, I guess it's 4th of July. It was yesterday. So it's very timely to say the word declaration, but it's kind of like and I did this before I did my business. I wrote on my fridge and I didn't even remember writing this. I said, I own my own business. I'm an entrepreneur. I own my own business, signed inner wisdom. And I left it on my fridge. I didn't remember, but it was like I am, right? And it makes it powerful. But to get to that level, I don't start with it because it's hard for you to know what your divine client is, right? Or your divine partner is when you don't know yourself yet and you aren't sure, you don't know these patterns that you're attracting, and I want it to be authentically you, not what I wrote down as my declaration. And so that's something I work with my clients on. And I have it, I'm going to laminate it, but I write it out and I look at it 3, 5 times a day. And the same thing with clients. I look at it, I'm like, okay.
yeah. And I have to say, like that has totally been the game changer, for me in my life and definitely in my business, being able to sit down and do, my vision in such a way where I am clear,
Mhm.
right? Not just of, the surface level things, but down to the nitty gritty. So we talked about that on your podcast too, how, it wasn't until I really got clear on what I wanted, in a relationship, I was just like, oh, it allowed me to, show up. First of all, in that way, to be the person to attract that. And then it made it super easy for me to see it because I already declared it. I already had the picture, in my mind. So when it showed up, it was just like, oh wow, this is it. It's here. So yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much for that. And so I am going to just ask one more question and then open it up for our Q&A session for our superstars who are in the room. So for, our superstars who are on here today and they realize, wow, I've been recreating the same dynamics in my business, that and I see these patterns in my personal life as well. What's the first step that they can take to create that new pattern?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first step that they can take to create their pattern is, first of all, I would say is write down the thought that goes with that pattern. Like, for
Mhm.
instance, right, with the boundary, I can't say no. Well, write down your thought. Like, I cannot say no, or I struggle saying no, or I'm terrified to say no. Make it real because that is like that's your reality. And it's important to accept that is the thought you have. And then after that, got to get to the feeling. How does that make you feel?
Yeah,
Like, how does that make you feel, right? Then, after you get to the feeling, you can now write down the story. Like, where does this come from?
yeah,
Where is this whole thing coming from? And then you can get into the reframe, and then you're going to do a new action. But the issue is when we don't do a reframe and we stay in our story, because that's what happens subconsciously,
yeah,
we're staying in our stories. That's why we keep attracting these types of clients or types of people that we're working with because we're still in our story. Think about it. When you're in a story and you're like, I am terrified to say no. I am terrified. That's the feeling that's coming up, right? I'm terrified. And then the stories, I'm going to be rejected. No one's going to like me. I'm not going to be able to, um, it could be anything. Like I'm not going to serve my clients to the ability that I could or normally. I mean, whatever it is that's coming up, think about it. If that's your story, you're telling yourself, no wonder you're going to continue, right? Because your next action step is you're not going to say no. You're going to attract someone that may even take advantage of you. A lot of folks, when we don't say no, we attract people that are like, oh, that's a good person that, I can take advantage of. So that's why that reframe is very important. But that takes time. And again, that's what I help people with because I remember doing the first reframe like with a couple of my clients, and they were like, what? A reframe? This is how my Dagmar, I've been living like this for 55 years of my life. So
Yeah.
that's why we work together on it. And there's different techniques to go through that. But those are, I know you said the first step, but I didn't want to keep you in the thought. I wanted to show
Oh,
you
no,
the
no, you're fine.
steps.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you. Okay.
absolutely.
Awesome. And so now go ahead and let everyone know how they could stay connected with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I put my LinkedIn out there. That's the first step. If you have a LinkedIn, I also have insightsmatch.com as my website. So you can also stay connected to me on that way. And then if you're also on Facebook, you can look me up on Facebook and I'm on Instagram too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dagmar, once again for just taking the time, to come here on social media Saturdays and just have this beautiful conversation with us. And I know this is going to be the first of many conversations that we have with you.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed this, Tara.
Awesome.